My name is Ida Reuterswärd. I work at the Swedish government offices. I've been working on the Swedish legislation on marine spatial planning, EU legislation on marine spatial planning, and the Baltic Sea Cooperation on marine spatial planning. And I have the honor to facilitate this session also because I take part in the government team preparing for a UN conference at the headquarters in New York in June on SDG 14 and Agenda 2030. Sweden, the government of Sweden and the government of Fiji are co-hosting this event. And I will tell you more about this. Just to remember where we were yesterday, we heard the messages that we have made great progress on marine spatial planning, but now we want to look ahead, form perhaps a joint roadmap to move forward. And to do this, the connection between marine spatial planning and the global governance, ocean governance goals is crucial to address. And that's what we're going to do in this session. So in this session, I really want to trigger your minds together with our prominent guests to ask ourselves, how can marine spatial planning and area-based management be a means to achieve the global ocean governance goals? And how can we form new partnerships or build further on earlier partnerships to make this happen? And we have 4 prominent speakers from UNESCO, from the EU Commission, from the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat, and from UNEP. I'm going to introduce them soon to you. And as I said, the questions to be asked from you, we do not want you to remain silent and feel ignored, as was said in the beginning, but really to think already about questions that you would like to ask the panel. Before saying a few words, we will do a new Slido and get you interactive. And can I get the question up that we prepared before the presentation? Let's see. Okay, there it is. Yesterday, Mr. Ehler presented to us that by 2030, a third or perhaps more of the surface area of the world's exclusive economic zones will have government-approved marine spatial plans. So I now want you to vote. It's true. Already you say it's true. You believe this idea. Great. Perfect. We'll come back to this after and see if even more people think that this will be true or even more. Okay, now we go back to the presentation short presentation that I prepared to launch the other presentations. Can I have the presentation, please? Great. So the global governance goals and also on ocean. You see these colorful boxes. That's how we are used to see them, the Agenda 2030. And 17 boxes altogether. We are told that this is an indivisible and agenda to keep together. But however, next slide. One of the boxes that countries agreed upon was box number 14, life below water. And within this box, we have a number of important targets closely relating to what we are addressing here today. And we will hear Mrs. Lee from the Convention of Biological Diversity to speak more how what's in this box also relates to the Aichi biodiversity targets that have been approved earlier. And we will also hear Mr. Barbier from UNESCO IUC on how the Sustainable Development Goal 14 relates to marine spatial planning. But I would like to, and could we please zoom up this picture a little bit? Just to trigger your minds. Could we get a full picture, perhaps? Thank you. Now we have restructured these goals a little bit. And what we see is what has been called by Stockholm Resilience Center and others as the wedding cake. 3 layers, and at the bottom you find Goal 14, life below water. You find climate, biodiversity, and water. And this is really triggering our minds to think in another way. And I have 2 messages that I want to follow up on with the discussions. 2 things. One, putting the ocean together with the other 3 goals as the fundament of the agenda. If you nudge and eat too much from the bottom layer, well, the wedding cake will eventually collapse. This is the thought kind of triggering our minds. And with this thinking, the basis for the agenda is really, the ocean is really a part of it. Healthy oceans produce fish. Fish provide food for us and for billions of people. And if we think about the ecosystem-based marine spatial planning, really trying to get healthy oceans and seas as a clear objective, then perhaps we could think that marine spatial planning has an important role to contribute to the whole agenda. Just a thought. The second message is partnerships, and that's what we're going to pick up for today. You see at the crown, the wedding couple in the top, number 17, that's the partnerships. And today we're going to hear, for example, Ms. Leinemann from dg-mare Commission to speak more about the European Initiative on International Ocean Governance, and Ms. Lisa Svensson from UNEP to speak about ideas for cooperation further. So let me come back to the next, just the final slide before I introduce the speakers. And this is the logo for the Ocean Conference. As I mentioned, we are now preparing for this conference to take place in June at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. It will be the first implementation conference of the Agenda 2030. So the oceans is at the center of the first kind of launching of the implementation of the agenda. And the Swedish government, together with Fiji, are co-hosting this event. And the message is, of course, not only Goal 14, but how it's important for the whole agenda. There are 2 things that you can keep in mind for this conference. One concrete deliverable will be a call for action, a negotiated text. It will not renegotiate the agenda, but highlight what is important for implementing the agenda. And this is where marine spatial planning comes into attention, because in the draft call for actions, I can share with you, marine spatial planning and area-based management is proposed to be highlighted more than in the original text of the Agenda 2030, showing on the importance of what we are committed to here today to implement the agenda. The second thing with the conference that I would like you to remember is that it's open for voluntary commitments, partnerships, organizations and countries coming together to see how we can contribute in implementing the agenda. And that's what we're also going to pick up for the discussion today. So now I will leave you to the other speakers and move over here. And I will present to you Mr. Julian Barbier, who is the head of Marine Policy and Regional Coordination Section of ioc-unesco. And his presentation will soon be shown here, a marine spatial strategy for implementing Agenda 2030. And now we also see that you are positive thinking. Great.
Thank you very much, Ida, and good morning, everybody. Welcome again to a sunny day in Paris to continue our exciting discussion on how to advance marine spatial planning. I will pick it up where Ida left it and really try to explain how we can better position and highlight the role of marine spatial planning in supporting the implementation of the Agenda 2030, in particular in the context of the SDG for the ocean, SDG 14, but not solely, because the ocean comes into other dimension of the SDGs, and we will see this in a minute. As spelled out now, the vision behind Agenda 2030 when it comes to the ocean is to build on the realization that more than ever, maintaining the quality of services and goods from ecosystems, as well as providing economic growth, requires a change in how we are viewing, the way we are managing, the way we are governing and using ocean resources and space. And this is very much embedded within SDG 14, as I said. But not only. If we look at the 17 goals, we try to find a balance between the need to promote environmental stewardship and economic growth. And those are really two sides of the same coin. And this dual objective is very much embedded within the marine spatial planning approach that many other countries are embarking on. So I think the real novelty when it comes to Agenda 2030 and the SDG is to bring different elements of ocean sectors, whether it's pollution, biodiversity, ocean acidification, science, which are generally addressed in separate forums into one global integrated framework with measurable targets that are to be achieved by all nations. And the word measurable here is very important. If we dive into ocean management and we look at the myriad of anthropogenic activities that are taking place in national waters, it becomes clear that most of these human activities goes well beyond SDG 14 in terms of a contribution to economic and social welfare. We can see that marine and coastal tourism, for example, contributes to SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. Renewable energy from the ocean can contribute to SDG 13 on climate change, and so on. Reciprocally, some of the non-ocean SDG can also catalyze and reinforce the development of specific activities. For example, better access to education can strengthen marine research, innovation, ocean literacy, and so on. So what is missing, of course, from this picture is the non-economic benefits that we also need to bring into the marine spatial planning process. Now, I would like to focus more specifically on SDG 14, and as you can see, we have 10 targets which are addressing various ocean dimensions, whether it's pollution, whether it's ocean acidification. But I want to highlight 5 specific targets which I think have a direct relevance to marine spatial planning, particularly in terms of the objectives that can be achieved through the establishment of an MSP process, either at a national or in a transnational context. And we'll start with target 14.2, which calls for the sustainable management and protection of marine and coastal ecosystems. And of course, while it does not provide a specific target, there's an indicator associated to this target, which calls for a proportion of EEZ managed under ecosystem-based approach. And by the way, those indicators have been agreed at the international level through the UN Statistical Commission. So this will be the way to monitor the implementation of each of those targets. So I think here marine spatial planning has a clear contribution to make to achieve this target in terms of providing a planning process within national jurisdiction and possibly beyond. That will also promote adaptive management to deal with the complex and dynamic nature of ecosystems. Of course, defining a common understanding and an internationally agreed definition of what constitutes a management unit under ecosystem approach is a challenge. But I think, again, the MSP community needs to work, and through the principles and guidance that have been issued over the years and the implementation at the national level, I think we can consider and assess a number of concepts to translate this SDG target into a quantifiable indicator. Now, I would like to highlight SDG target 14.5, and I'm sure Ji-Hoon will also talk about this one. And this one calls for the conservation of at least 10% of coastal and marine areas, primarily through the establishment of MPAs, and this is, of course, reiterating the Aichi target under the CBD. The good news is that, of course, the numbers of MPAs around the world are now increasing. I think we are now about 4% of MPAs covering the ocean surface. But we also need to focus on the effectiveness of MPAs. And recent studies have shown that some of them are not reaching their ecological objectives because of their small size, or because they are poorly designed, or because they failed due to the degradation of the surrounding environment. So this means that MPAs need to be considered and managed within the larger marine environment. And of course, here, marine spatial planning can be a catalyst for achieving this target by integrating marine protected areas planning in the broader marine planning and ocean zoning efforts. And of course, this target can also be inspirational for guiding MSP process in terms of conservation goals to be achieved by nations. Target 14.4 talks about regulating, harvesting fisheries, and of course ending IUUs and implementing science-based management plans. And of course we hear very often from fishermen and the fishing industry that we are increasingly working in congested areas where space is getting scarce. And from a MSP practice, it's always, I think it's been highlighted yesterday as well, it's been a challenge to engage with the fishery sectors in the planning process. But maybe things are changing as well. I want to highlight this recent report, which was published by FAO a couple of years ago, that makes a very strong case for MSP as a tool to achieve sustainable fisheries and aquaculture in a regional context, particularly in terms of its potential to improve regional fishery management practices and its capacity to determine the most appropriate locations for fishing grounds, also assessing carrying capacity and selecting sites and technology and avoiding user conflicts. So again, this approach and this report particularly advocates for MSP in terms of managing complex multi-stakeholders, users and uses. So I think we need to stimulate this kind of dialogue in other regional fisheries management organization, and this is a task probably that we have to ahead of us. Target 14.7 deals with the need to increase economic benefits for small island developing states and least developing countries. And again, it's really primarily about promoting sustainable ocean economy for those particular countries. That's what we call the blue economy, basing this approach on economic growth, environmental sustainability, social inclusions, and strengthening of oceans ecosystem. Again, this is an objective that is integrated in several of MSP programs around the world, and I wanted, of course, we've heard this yesterday from our colleague from Seychelles, that some of those goals are very much embedded in the national MSP plans that Seychelles is developing for the whole of the EEZ. So I think this is encouraging, and I understand there are over small island developing states moving forward with this approach, including Mauritius, as well as in the Caribbean and Pacific region. I want to highlight, of course, the role of marine research, capacity development, and technology transfer, and of course this is very much of interest to the IOC. This is a cross-cutting target for SDG 14. This is very much at the heart of the MSP as well, as we need sound scientific knowledge to understand ecosystem processes, to understand the ecological limits, the tipping points, the socio-ecological resilience, and ecosystem services. We also need to improve ocean data, the collection of ocean data that contribute to better modeling, to predict ocean conditions, and of course use these models into the decision-making process. We need to better improve the science to understand the impacts of cumulative stresses and feed this knowledge into ocean planning and environmental impact assessment. And to do this, we need, of course, better international data exchange systems that can provide access to data and strategic information from all available sources for a wide spectrum of stakeholders. So again, I think through this, hopefully the investment that nations will put in the next 10, 15 years into research, I think, and of course in building research infrastructure, we need to make sure that the benefits will come to building the science base of marine spatial planning. And that also implies creating new scientific collaboration across natural and social sciences. I want to highlight, of course, the issue of capacity development, which is a key dimension in all Agenda 2030 targets. As we have heard yesterday from Charles, we only have, at this stage, a handful of countries that have established MSP process. And this is very much linked to the level of capacity that exists in countries. So I think the transition to ecosystem-based management requires developing capacities in all regions and at all levels. And this is at the core of the mandate of IOC, of course. And this needs to happen at several levels: individuals, organizations and institutions, and of course society. And again here, the role of ocean literacy in this context is essential, as we need to improve the way we are communicating the benefits of MSP to society. And by the way, we will have a communication workshop this evening to bring up some of these issues. So the point here is that efforts in capacity development needs to address those three levels to be effective and to trigger real change. And this is essential if we are to reach the targets under 2030. To conclude, I think we need to be much better at framing marine spatial planning in the context of Agenda 2030. Of course, the SDG 14, but not only. Many countries are now moving into the development of SDG national strategies, and the MSP community needs to be at the table and be part of this dialogue. This can happen by building a much stronger narrative at the national level on how MSP will help countries to shift from the usual sectoral management to integrated ecosystem-based management as called for by the Agenda 2030. And at the end of the day, achieving SDGs will require nations to move into a much more holistic approach, to consider the entire ecosystem in their management efforts, to have plans that are working at multiple scales, to adopt a long-term perspective, and here the objective is, of course, 2030. Considering humans as integral parts of the ecosystem, having an adaptive case-by-case approach which is informed by science, and of course sustaining production potential for both goods and services. So the end message is that MSP is an essential process for nations to meet their commitments under this Agenda 2030. And I just want to finish with this slide because I think, of course, the Agenda 2030 has to be implemented by the countries, and countries have committed to do this. But the UN agencies, of course, have a responsibility to assist in implementation of 2030. And of course, we have some of the players with us here who are in charge of various ocean sectors and ocean management. We have, of course, UNEP, CBD, UNESCO and IOC, of course, but we need to bring in the other agencies into the picture, the IMO, who are dealing with shipping issues. The International Seabed Authority for issues related to area beyond national jurisdiction, the FAO, and so on. So I think we can work together and we can support the efforts of the countries through this kind of interaction. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Barbière. And please reminder that you can ask questions. We will take them after the presentations. And perhaps you wanted to react on the last slide that Mr. Barbière showed on the multitude and the governance structure, showing on a broad sectorial approach within the UN to work on these issues. Perhaps you want to ask some questions how we address that further. Just one question before I ask our next speaker to come to the scene. So, Mr. Barbière, yesterday we heard from Mr. Ehler that we should really think where we want to be in 2030. And if I may say so, if you wake up the first day of 2030, you had a great party last night, New Year's Eve, and you wake up, and where are we when it comes to marine spatial planning and implementing the agenda? And what's the role of your organization? What have you done during the 10 years? Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. Well, first, I hope the hangover will not be too big, and I will still have a lucidity in my comments. But I think in 2030 we want to be. First, I think it's realistic that this target of tripling the number of countries who are engaged in MSP. I mean, we have now made a lot of efforts, and I think this community is coming to maturation now, and we are seeing the issue of MSP being highlighted in many international ocean forums. So I think this is very optimistic. We of course need to translate that into real implementation on the ground, and I think one of the challenges will be to move from this advisory MSP processes to a more regulatory side. I mean, Charles mentioned yesterday that so far at this stage, most of the MSP efforts are from on an advisory nature. So I think we need to shift on the other side, and we need to inverse those figures. We also need to have a much stronger integration of marine spatial planning efforts with national coastal zone management, national economic development strategies, and national SDG strategies, so that the benefits of MSP is clear and really promoted through those policies.
Thank you. So we are lagging behind in time, but we launched the second presenter today, Mr. Felix Leinemann, who is the head of unit for European Commission dg-mare Blue Economy Sectors, Aquaculture and Maritime Spatial Planning. And your presentation is what is the role of the EU in developing further, can we get it here? International Ocean Governance, an agenda for the future of our oceans. That was the title. Welcome.
Thank you, Ida. Good morning, everyone. Neither the title of the presentation nor the title of my unit helps with catching up on time, so I'll try to catch up a bit. International Ocean Governance. An initiative on international ocean governance, as the speech of Commissioner Vella announced yesterday, was launched in November last year by Commissioner Vella and the High Representative Mogherini of the European Commission, in order to propose action by the EU and internationally on ocean governance. That's part of the European Union's response to the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN. So why do we put forward this initiative, or why did we put forward this initiative? It's about managing the oceans and using them and their resources in ways that keep our oceans healthy, productive, safe, secure, and resilient. But the current framework, I mean, we've just seen a bit of the complexity, and despite all the agencies that are there, despite of all the legal instruments, the current framework is not effective enough to reach the objective, as illustrated by increased pollution, overexploitation, overfishing, climate change, and acidification of the oceans. So the marine environment doesn't respect national boundaries, and the challenges we are facing, they are global. So we need to act not just at European level, but at global level. And in fact, the oceans are in our international interest. I can only repeat what has been often said. Oceans are essential to the economy, but also for our life. Every second breath we take comes from the ocean, no matter whether we are in a landlocked country or whether we are on the coast. The oceans are vital in our fight against climate change. They absorb 25% of all carbon emissions and redistribute heat around the globe. On the other hand, the importance of the oceans and our use of the oceans is set to grow. The world may have 10 billion people populating it by 2050. The space on Earth is getting scarcer and scarcer. We need to feed this world of people. So humankind will not have any choice but to turn to the oceans for help. There's a big potential because currently we know 70% of the planet's surface is the ocean, but we use them only for 5% of our economic activity. The output of the ocean's economy is estimated at 1.3 trillion euros, but it's set to double by 2030. But when we turn to the oceans, we need to make sure that this is done in a sustainable way and that there is no race to the bottom. Because, and that has also been emphasized before, the oceans are under pressure. They are fragile and vulnerable. Very minor temperature changes in the oceans have an immense effect on the temperature in the world and on global warming. But the oceans are getting warmer already. They are getting more acidic. Sea levels are rising. And if the trend continues, by 2050, they could contain more plastic than fish. So we are not treating them well. The oceans are also the largest crime scene. Many things happen out of sight of people. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, smuggling, piracy, pollution, all the things that are happening out of sight and that are not controlled. So the reality is simple. If we don't act today, we compromise our future. Oceans need better care and better management. And that's why we have come forward with this proposal for sound ocean governance. So, I mean, in conclusion, we need to keep, not in conclusion of the, but in conclusion of the ocean governance, we need to keep the ocean safe, secure, clean, and sustainably managed within a global strategy. The agenda that the European Union has proposed for the future of our ocean is, first, we have a comprehensive framework of rules and actions at European level, but we need to work regionally and globally with our partners. So the agenda comprises 3 priority areas, which you see on this slide. First, improving the international ocean governance framework, the whole legal, administrative, and logistical framework that is available to manage the ocean. Second, we need to reduce the pressures on the ocean and create conditions for a sustainable blue economy. They are a major resource, and we should use this potential, but we should do it carefully and in a sustainable manner. Thirdly, and that resonates a lot with what Julian has just said, we need to strengthen ocean research and data. We don't know much about the oceans. We just spent 18 months searching for a plane, but we can locate a rover on Mars. So there's a big difference between what we know about the oceans and what we know about space. Now, what does this all have to do with maritime spatial planning, you may wonder? One action that we have put forward in this ocean governance communication is to promote maritime spatial planning at global level. The sustainable use of the oceans and their biodiversity, including the achievement of the relevant sustainable development goals, depend on the appropriate planning and management. We need to maximize the potential of maritime activities and uses and use the space, but we need to arbitrate in case of conflict. We need stability, predictability, and transparency. At the same time, we should take care that we do not oppress the basis of the economic development, which is a healthy environment. This conference is witness that the take-up of maritime spatial planning is increasing worldwide, and a significant body of experience has been developed. The European Union takes part in that, and we saw yesterday that 46% of initiatives that take place on MSP are taken in the EU. But still, there's a lot to be done. So what are we doing? We are working closely with EU member states on the implementation of a directive that has been adopted, that's binding legislation on the member states, adopted in 2014, and requiring member states to put in place maritime spatial plans in their waters by 2021. This is a major step for marine governance in the EU. There is also a process that helps member states work together, because they need to work across borders. That's one part of this directive and one part of this legislation. And we are supporting member states in doing this through several elements. One is an EU maritime spatial planning platform, an assistance mechanism that has a help desk and that helps and that organizes workshops. Several representatives of this assistance mechanism are here, and you also see their posters outside. We have funded cross-border projects, and we are continuing to do so in all the different sea basins. There are also posters outside, and a couple of these projects have their stands in the hall. And we work internationally. We think that the experience that we can bring to the table can help a lot in implementing the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. We should also cooperate or strengthen our cooperation with third countries. So that's why we will aim at developing guidance to facilitate the implementation of transboundary maritime spatial planning, as well as pilot cross-border projects to test practices in cross-border operation with non-EU member states. And we look very much forward to working with ioc-unesco and other partners around the world in doing this. What are the next steps for the ocean governance communication? It has been submitted to the European Parliament. The Council of Ministers is working on conclusions on it, so the preparatory work has just been finished, so soon we hope that these conclusions, endorsing in many ways the initiative of the Commission, will be adopted. And, there is another stop this year, not just the Ocean Conference in New York in June, but also our Ocean Conference, which is the fourth in a series of conferences launched by the Obama administration in 2014. It will be hosted by the European Union in Malta on the 5th and 6th of October, and we hope to obtain a lot of commitments that bring forward the sustainable development of the oceans at this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leinemann. And please continue asking questions, perhaps regarding the very important conference in October, also focusing and giving strong momentum globally for work on oceans. Quick question before I present next speaker. So, Mr. Leinemann, we hear that the EU is now drawing on the extensive experiences from working on marine spatial planning and have developed a communication and on ocean governance and with a special action 10 on marine spatial planning. So what are your hopes? You mentioned transboundary guidelines for MSP. Can you say a few words on what are your thoughts on sharing experiences?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think in the European Union we have a particular way of working together, which is based on rules, on legislation, but also on a lot of cooperation between the member states. And the experience we have gathered in the past few years already, since the adoption of the directive in 2014, is very, very valuable in terms of how can you work across borders. The MSP challenge game out in the lobby is another example, which shows that the sea is for all of us. It's not just, it doesn't stop at the national border. So we need to work across borders. We have a lot of experiences. We will have later today two more sessions working on this, which take examples that came out from a study that we've launched on international ocean governance and cross-border or transboundary ocean governance. So I think this is a complement to the work that is anyway already taking place in ioc-unesco and the step-by-step approach. And we want to bring those two experiences together to help develop the transboundary aspect.
Good to hear. Next speaker, please, Ms. Lisa Svensson, Director of Marine and Coastal Ecosystem Branch at UNEP. And your presentation, Regional Ocean Governance in the Context of Agenda 2030. Please, Lisa.
Thanks, Ida, and good morning, everyone. I just wanted to make an initial comment, and if we talk about lack of ocean governance on a global level, it's probably most likely where we are in the state of ocean health for the moment. At the same time, ocean governance is very much on a global level, so if we take it down to more national regional level, that's when we come into this marine spatial planning. So spatial planning is ocean governance on a global level. And I think that's touch base also what Julian just mentioned previously, that we need to get this ocean planning into the whole Agenda 2030. And I think that was also the background of what this conference that Ida mentioned, the Ocean Conference in June, but also the conference that EU will host, harboring the SDG 14, because there is no harbor for that particular goal in the whole Agenda 2030. So I think keeping that in mind when we go away, that the foundation to even be able to explore and protect the ocean is this planning and the governance aspects of it. Another comment that I wanted to make is that UN Environment, as we are now much more pronouncing our organization, have a new leadership, and we have a new ED, Executive Director, Erik Solheim. And he has clearly pointed out ocean as one of the top priorities for us. And there is, of course, a background to that, but foremost that the status of ocean and the impact it has on humans is crucial that we need to address. And I have a few slides that I would like to share with you, at least you have something to look at while I'm talking. And foremost, I think we have seen those slides quite often. And I think the key point here is that we need to have a much more integrated, but foremost also the holistic approach when we talk about the spatial planning. And what does that mean? Holistic and integrated approach means also that we need to have an understanding of all the stake and all the interest in ocean. And we need to strengthen the collaboration. So is there anything spatial planning is all about? It's collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration, clearly. And Ida also mentioned this slide that we have seen in many conferences. And I think it cannot be emphasized more than enough that once again, the ocean is the foundation for if we are to achieve the Agenda 2030. And we do have one goal on ocean. At the same time, there are ocean indicators and targets in the other 16 goals. So we need to keep that perspective as well. So when we talk about ecosystem-based management, what is that and what does that really mean? And I think there were some questions, or at least in the discussion yesterday, what does it mean? What does it entail? And I think the first step is, if we back off a bit, is that we need to have a clear assessment. We need to map the ocean resources. We need to know what we have, and we need to assess that. We need to assess it from a valuation point. And of course, when we talk about valuation, that could be both economic, but also social and culture. So when we sometimes face discussion about what is the valuation of ocean, we need to also address the other aspect of the valuation. And once we have this, we can move forward and seeing, okay, so what does this mean? And who are we interacting for the spatial planning? In particular, also, this is not a side effect, or this is not a side project or government or side government initiative. We clearly need to engage with policymaker and decision maker. And also, since we have a huge interest from the industrial production and consumption from ocean, we need to involve the private sector clearly. So all this spatial planning, and when we do a mapping, assess, and evaluate the ocean marine resources, we need to make sure it's integrated in the policymaking and decision-making level. And having said that, of course, when we talk about spatial planning or the ocean governance, we have various different levels. And one of them is, of course, nations. We have nations, but we also have, and maybe even more so when we talk about oceans and seas, we have the regional perspective. Because we know that ocean doesn't face any borders, and that it's clearly so that the regional perspective has a clearly beneficial scale when we talk about spatial planning. So this is coming into the regional perspective. And once we have, and which is also Julius mentioned before, the 576 sort of agreement on how to deal with oceans in the UN context, all various organizations, that is on a global level, on local level and national level. But if we look at the regional level as such, which should also strive, and this is what we're trying to do from the UN environment, trying to strengthen the regional cooperations. And if we look at the regional perspective, you come from that, you see we have 18 regional seas around the globe. And this is a patchwork that we need to strengthen. But foremost, what does that mean? Strengthen means to collaborate. We need to exchange experience and best practice among the regional seas, but also within the region itself. So we have the Regional Sea Program, which sometimes have a convention or an action plan and protocols. But we also have the large marine ecosystems, we have the fishery bodies, and all those organizations that was mentioned in this slide that Judith mentioned. So the regional perspective is crucial on how to move forward on targeting spatial planning. And just to give you a few examples, is a transboundary marine protected areas network has been established among countries, an example in Kenya and Tanzania, but also in the Mediterranean. And we also have seen an emerging cross-sector collaboration at this regional level. And just to mention also a few ones, we have the General Fishery Commissions for the Mediterranean, and we also have the OSPAR and the Northeast Atlantic Fishery Commissions collaborating very strongly in that particular region. The Southeast Pacific Regional Seas also has an integrated ocean policy process. And I think the key message that we should all bring with us is that we need to strengthen these regions, because that is also the foundation on how we are then implementing the whole Agenda 2030. And just another example is that we have a South China Sea project that are also supposed to be implemented through the Southeast Asia Seas. So tools and capacity building on ecosystem-based management and marine spatial planning is to support the whole SDG agenda. And we, as a UN Environment, have supported countries and regional seas in achieving all those indicators and targets in all the SDGs, including Agenda 2030. And there is a range of capacity building activities that we are currently planning. And just to mention a few of them is that we have a practical guidance to countries on how to implement the ecosystem-based approach. And the marine spatial planning in practical initiative is another one. And we also have guidance on area-based management and how to deliver exactly. And we're currently discussing with the European Commission on guidance and how to develop guidance on multi-sector tools, such as the spatial planning, intercoastal zone management, and also single sector approach, targeting, for example, fishing sector, etc. So what does that mean if we really have a vision? What is the vision for marine spatial planning? And I think Ida asked us all that question. What do we see when we wake up 1st of January? I hope I have a day off, really, but we see. Let's make area-based management tool a common and practical approach to sustainable development. And I think we foremost use interdisciplinary science for a better policymaking and management. So what does that mean? We have natural science and we have social science. And scientists, foremost, of course, needs to work together from their social science base, but also taking the science into the policymaking. So once again, the integrated approach, understanding how policymakers and politicians make policies. Science is one, but you also need to add the economic and also, of course, the political aspects of it. And I think also another important point to point out is that no one fits, or no size fits all, rather. And we need to have various perspectives or accept differences, particularly if we look at the regional context. Regions are different, nations are different, and we need to adhere to that. Also, not having a single sector. We know that ocean faces a lot of different sectors, everything from fishing, oil and gas, tourism, etc. So we need to approach all those industrial sectors. And we also need to harmonize legal and regulatory framework across the borders. And this is, of course, a greater challenge because legal aspects is often addressed on a national basis. So in that sense, we also need to ensure that we have a full benefit sharing among the stakeholders. And that is, of course, built on trust in sharing information. And we also need to develop a practical trade-off analysis for realistic planning. And of course, the whole investment scenarios is clearly important, particularly if we are to develop the blue economy, we need to have the private sector on board. We need to have them address the dynamic and creative force that we bureaucrats is not always able to realize, unfortunately. So how are we going to go about to actually realization of this vision? And I think, once again, Julia mentioned very well a few points of it. We need to establish a global ocean information data facility so we know on how to support the SDGs. And we need to integrate environmental and social and economic information for policymaking and spatial planning. And we need to make this information available and transparent, both to countries and regions and individuals in private sector. And we need to link those existing efforts in regional data and to share with infrastructure and capacities. And the second point is that we need to form this global capacity building partnership on area-based management. We have the UN agencies, civil society, academia, regional seas, the large marine ecosystems, and private sector. All of those need to have much more stronger capacity to understand where we're going. So we at the UN Environment, we stand ready to explore and to join such wider partnership and possibly in preparatory process, both for this upcoming conference in June, that Sweden and Fiji is co-hosting, but also for our ocean conference in Malta this year, and also for the ocean conference in Indonesia, the next, and Norway having the next one. So once again, I think my key words, if there is anything, is collaboration and integration, and clearly much more understanding where we're all coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Svensson. And let's keep the two concrete suggestions on Lisa's last slide in mind. I will actually let the next speaker to the stage now, and I will pick up some of your questions, some extra time for Lisa to speak afterwards, because we're lagging behind a little bit. So I will definitely move forward your questions to the panel later, and also pick up on Lisa's ideas. So now, may I introduce to you Ms. Ji-Hun Lee. She is the coordinator for Marine and Coastal Biodiversity, Environmental Affairs Officer at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And the title of the presentation you see up there. Please, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Ida. Good morning, everybody. Marine spatial planning is a tool. So like any other tools of humanity, what is important is not the tool itself, it's our intention, is here. And what is more important is that we understand the full potential that this tool can contribute to in achieving our intention. So that's why today I'm presenting marine spatial planning as a tool for achieving Aichi biodiversity target and sustainable development goals. And the messages is coming from the 196 parties of the CBD, Convention on Biological Biodiversity. And this is based on the decision from COP 10, COP 11, COP 12, and COP 13. So in terms of what we are trying to do this, the intention, I think previous speakers have explained quite well, quite comprehensively about sustainable development goals. I want to just remind you that in most of sustainable development goals, there are different elements of Aichi biodiversity targets, to which 196 parties are committed to for its implementation. So for the next slide. As all of you may know, the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 was adopted by 10th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in Nagoya with a very ambitious vision. And I want to also again remind you that the vision goes up to 2050. This is a really long-term vision. And in this vision, they state that biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored, and wisely used. So I want to just set the context that the goal, the long-term goal and the vision why we are trying to do here, all the discussion that we are doing here is coming from this global commitment together with also, which is also reflected in the Sustainable Development Goal, not only in the Goal 14, but in many various other goals. And the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 have 4 strategic goals. And as you can see here, it's not only talking about improving the status of biodiversity, but also addressing direct pressure on biodiversity and ecosystems, and also its sustainable use of biological components, and also addressing the underlying causes that is affecting biodiversity loss by mainstreaming biodiversity across different government and society. And also it is focusing on enhancing benefits to all humanity, which is coming from biodiversity and ecosystem services. So I think we have to first clear in our mind what we are trying to achieve using this tool. So in terms of the implementation for this strategic plan, the focus at the convention is national implementation. And the Secretariat, which is located in Montreal, Secretariat staff is working through the Conference of the Parties, the governing body of the convention, and also its subsidiary bodies, by helping them, by assisting countries in terms of agenda setting and policy guidance and capacity building and also resource mobilization and also facilitating political engagement and also monitoring and review of the implementation. So all these 4 elements are also being applied in terms of marine spatial planning. So when it comes to marine spatial planning, I have already explained that there have been long-term discussion about whether the parties see marine spatial planning as a useful tool, and it actually took place at the same time when they were discussing, negotiating on strategic plan. So since 2010, in Decision 1029 on marine and coastal biodiversity, marine spatial planning was recognized as a useful tool. But then there was a guidance to the Secretariat that maybe Secretariat should help parties understand better how useful it can be to, by sharing experience on the implementation of marine spatial planning. And also we were asked what kind of guidelines are available to, and also to work further on consolidating the guidance so that it can meet the practical need of the parties in its implementation. And that's why also we were asked to develop some kind of information sharing mechanism to share the experience of marine spatial planning. And in doing that, we were tasked also to work closely with the UN Environment and also ioc-UNESCO and many other relevant partners in terms of meeting the request from the COP. So as you can see here, this is from COP 13, the most recent decision, 13.9, which was adopted last year, December, in Mexico. So as you can see here, COP 13 recognizes MSP as a participatory tool to facilitate the application of ecosystem approach, and also they see that it will expedite the progress toward achieving IC targets. And also main theme of this COP 13 was mainstreaming, and they found that this MSP will be a very useful tool for mainstreaming of biodiversity in different sectors. And also, one of the important points is that marine spatial planning has to be implemented in close linkages with existing management measures and for conserving biodiversity and sustainable use, such as integrated marine and coastal area management, and also various impact assessment, marine protected area, and also fishery management and pollution control management. So you can see that MSP is, in fact, is recognized serving various targets, not only 1 or 2 targets, but in various aspects, it is providing framework and processes that will be helpful and useful in achieving all these different targets. So I want to just give you an example how this is connected with other work within the convention. So yesterday we heard from Charles Illa about his experience in UAE about getting all different values by different stakeholders. So one of the value was ecological value. And CBD EPSA process, which is describing the ecological and biological significance of marine areas, which covers so far almost 74% of global ocean in past 6 years, is in fact helping you to understand better the ecological and biological value of marine areas at the global and the regional scale. So it is not just the polygon in the map, and if you go to the website, you can see all the description of these areas, which in terms of surface area marks about 19% of total ocean area so far. So it means although we are worried about this lack of scientific information in terms of which will support the area-based management, still we can do a lot by compiling existing scientific information. And I want to just show that this information is there. But then the question is how we can move from EPSA to marine spatial planning. The EFSA is only one layer of understanding ecological and biological value. And as we have heard yesterday, we need also different dimension of values, socioeconomic values, and also cultural values, and different also governance issues. So we need a better understanding of how human activities will interact in different EFSAs and what are the key interactions and stress and pressures they are facing, and which will allow us having more specific understanding about what kind of tools can be applied to address these tools. So there is elements that we have, but we need also next steps. And also within the convention, also they recognize strategic environmental assessment as a very important tool for biodiversity conservation. And I'm also using example that this existing tool can help better understanding these other elements of putting together this ecological value with socioeconomic values and also other cultural values, because it is in fact providing a framework to focus on key problems and priorities and assess risk and opportunities for strategic options and implement through stakeholders' involvement and dialogues. So I think I want to just ask you, what will be your intention of applying marine spatial planning? I'm using this as using the framework of strategic environmental assessment. Do you want to identify marine potential activities, or do you want to identify marine development potential? When in my about 20 years ago, when we started national ICM planning, we suddenly received 1,000 of coastal use plan by the local authorities, because they realized that they need to put all these possible activities in the list to be reviewed by the national government. So do you want to have all this list of marine potential activities and be in a position to just assess what could be environmental impacts of these activities? Or maybe you want to help to create a sustainable context for development, addressing strategic conditions that will enhance the value of marine socio-ecological potential. In other words, how can we take advantage of this socio-economic and also ecological potential of the marine areas without putting at risk current and future sustainable uses? So I think what kind of question we are going to ask is very important in terms of making your marine spatial planning as a strategic exercise. So it's almost my last slide. So I guess you will ask in your area, what is your vision? But important thing is you should have first strategic objectives. And of course, you should understand environmental and sustainable issues and problems. But then also you need to understand that priority macroeconomic, socioeconomic policies so that it will all come together so that you can have a strategic assessment framework. But all these things are very easy to say, but very difficult to implement in your area. But asking the first question right is very important. So to help countries in terms of capacity building and to apply all these different tools in a right context, we have already capacity building initiative, which was built in 2010. So we have been helping about 100 countries around the world, about benefiting 570 participants, mostly at the regional workshop and also national workshop and also global level training of trainers. So, and also in terms of partnership, Lisa mentioned all the regional CIS organization. We at the global level also building on the work of UN Environment and FAO. We are having global dialogue with regional CIS organization and regional fisheries bodies around the world at the global scale. So we have a platform already in terms of sharing experience and in terms of capacity building. And we have a lot to share. And I think we have to understand that the on-ground implementation is a really challenging task, and we have to understand the different contexts of different countries and find the effective way to really provide the right support mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. So thank you, Ms. Lee, for your presentation, and now it's time for your questions. Can I get some questions on the screen so we can pick from your ideas? Just waiting for the questions. I can't see any. I hope you asked some questions. So what we have seen in this session is really that while MSP is not really spelled out in the Agenda 2030, there is extensive experience going on relating to marine spatial planning, showing how it could be a means to and work within the agenda. And we also see in the perspectives of capacity building, regional cooperation, and now we're going to pick up on some questions and see. Okay. Good. Well, we start with the first one. How can we make sure that the SDG 14 targets are enforceable and legally meaningful, both at the international and domestic levels? Who wants to pick up on that? How can we work on SDG 14 to make them really being implemented? They are closely connected, Ms. Lee, to the Aichi targets, and perhaps you have a comment on enforcing targets.
Thank you, Ida. This is a question for everybody, and I just came back from Costa Rica, where we had a Sustainable Ocean Initiative regional workshop for Caribbean and Central America, and there, how we help the countries maybe can be an example. We gave the tools, but then giving tools or guidelines is not enough. So we asked them to really set some strategies, steps. First, they have to identify their baseline, where they are in terms of their SDG 14 or specific Aichi targets. And then using that as a baseline, they use these different tools, but marine spatial planning as an overall cross-sectoral framework and processes, and they come up with some roadmaps either at the national level or sub-regional level, and also at the regional level, because there are a lot of opportunities in terms of, for example, in Caribbean, it is the CLME Plus project, and also there are many donors trying to really give some financial assistance to many, many developing countries. So, and also they fully understand the lack of capacity, but where to start. So to make all these investment and opportunities practically also contributing to the countries should know also where they are in terms of their targets, and also they should come up with strategic approaches how they can implement better and start to talk with different availability of donor investment and also the opportunity from the global processes and regional processes. So I think still the issue is capacity, but just general capacity building approach is not, will not work. We need to know clearly where we are and what would be the next step, and also it should be very strategic. Thank you.
Lisa Svensson, please.
Thank you. I think if you look at the whole SDG agenda, including the SDG 14, this is a very global policy-making, nice words. And if you take that down to a much more concrete and implementing level, you could have the regional level, and which I was emphasizing in my presentation. For the ocean, for the seas, the regional perspective makes sense. And the harmonization and stronger collaboration is, of course, crucial. But we do have those regional seas that do have action plans and convention that is legally binding with protocols. So what we're trying to achieve is, together with relevant stakeholders and UN bodies, really strengthen the collaboration so the SDGs as a global instrument framework is implemented at a regional level through the regional seas, large marine ecosystems in close collaboration, private stakeholder, etc. And this will then be the legal instrument that we need to follow up and then enforce, of course. So that's quite crucial. And just to mention that we do have 143 countries and contracting parties to those regional seas. So I think that's the answer to that question.
So clearly linking the SDG targets also to other policy agreements, for example, the Regional Seas Conventions. Now perhaps now we'll pick a new question. This is new to me, so I'm kind of learning how to use Slido. But I think we'll pick up on the question at the top. There is a great number of agencies with marine governance responsibilities within the UN part of the system. Could serious streamlining help? And perhaps I'll give it to Julian, because you got a concrete question here. What is the next actions for IOC in bringing MSP forward? Please.
So you want me to do both questions? Okay, sure. Thanks. Yes, of course. I mean, the plethora of UN agencies who have a responsibility within the ocean is quite impressive. And as you can have seen from this diagram, there's many of them. And not all of them are part of this dialogue on MSP. And I think that's where we really need to improve. In terms of interagency collaboration, there is a mechanism in the UN called UN Oceans, and that actually brings together all those agencies to work together. And I think there's now starting to be an interesting discussions amongst, through this body, on how we can all work collectively in supporting the implementation of SDG 14. But of course, I think that also requires streamlines. And one of the things that will happen in next year will be actually the UN Oceans would be reviewed, and the terms of reference would be reviewed. And I think this issue of supporting SDG 14 will come up very highly, and member states will probably suggest some changes in the way we can work better. But of course, we already have a lot of collaboration across agencies. I mean, we're working on an MOU with UNEP, we have an MOU with CBD, and so I think we also should not disregard this, because there's already quite a lot being done. On the issue of, can I take the second question now? Related to the actions that IOC will take in marine spatial planning. Well, I think we've presented yesterday some of the activities in which we are engaged, and of course we will continue to document the implementation of marine spatial planning. We have the website, of course, which has been updated, but we're just finalizing this assessment of more than 70 initiatives that have been reviewed in terms of a level. So we want to continue and to be a kind of clearinghouse mechanism for MSP practitioners to find out more what countries are doing, sharing information. We also want to work, and Felix has announced this, on the development of these transboundary MSP guidelines. And I think there's a lot of potential working on maybe following the step-by-step approach and trying to identify what are the challenges and the key principles that we could put out there that could help really countries to work together at that level. And of course, it needs to bring in the regional seas and the large marine ecosystem, because those are providing a collaborative platform at the regional level. And of course, capacity development. I think for me, that's the other big issue that we need to really invest in the next 10 years, really to bring up the level and triple our targets.
Thank you. Felix, you want to follow up on that? We have a meeting in June approaching on the ocean, and a meeting in October on the ocean. And how can the meeting in June, for example, be a stepping stone to show on collaboration for marine spatial planning and the way forward, and cooperation with others?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I also see on the screen what will the IOC and the EC do very concretely.
Exactly.
So we first we prepared this conference together, which is, I think, already a very big step in getting forward. But we see that there's much more to be done. As Julian mentioned, develop guidance for transboundary MSP. We are also working on the how MSP can actually contribute to a sustainable blue economy. We are launching a study. We will organize a conference in October this year about this. We are working how to improve ecosystem-based MSP together. We are looking at capacity building. You have the Ocean, what is it called? The Ocean Training Academy, something like that, Ocean Teacher Academy. And in view of the June event, we were thinking, maybe I used this opportunity, we were thinking of organizing a side event at the conference. We have a little practical problem in that apparently only any organization can only do one side event, and both IOC and the Commission have already made an appeal for that side event. So if anybody would like to partner with us, meet us at the coffee and see whether there can be anything done.
So there you have a concrete proposal for approaching Julian or Felix in the coffee break, discussing how can we partner up to highlight the importance of marine spatial planning at the conference, already at the conference in June. Okay, I think, is Jennifer here who asked the question? You are out there? Up there, she's with us. And she asked the question, what has been the role of academia and scientists in marine spatial planning initiatives you have been or are involved in? And what is more needed from this sector, from academia and science? And perhaps Ms. Lee want to discuss, because this is very related to ecosystem-based management, of course, and others.
Yes, I can give a story at the global level. I mentioned briefly about CBD EPSA process, and now I think you'd encounter a lot of scientific also review paper about this EPSA, which stands for ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. So when we organize this workshop, we have organized 12 regional workshops in past 6 years. The countries would nominate their scientists, and they will bring all different type of ecological, biological, or geological, or oceanographic data, so that all this information can be compiled also through GIS database. So then experts will be asked to describe a specific area that would meet this EPSA criteria, which was adopted by 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. So in fact, the scientists who were nominated either by parties or the relevant organization have been at the center of this identifying ecological value. But then this is only one type of value and one type of stakeholders that would represent. So then the next question is to what extent we can involve also socio-economic, academe, which will represent also different type of values. So I think we still have to go the next step, and we are going to, in fact, when there will be biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction PRACOM coming up, and we'll have a EPSA side event. And in fact, we have invited the International Coalition of Fishery Association so that we can see how fishing industry can help also countries in terms of updating science, because they can also play the role. So I think that is also another possibility, that we can invite more widely different stakeholders that can contribute to the scientific information, so that it can be brought into further updating this EPSA description, because this is open process with the advancement of scientific information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. I hope Jennifer got a lot of information there. So I think we'll pick the last question now. Julian wanted to say something?
No, sorry, I just wanted to add on what Yoon just mentioned. I think the role of academia is absolutely essential in really training the next generation of MSP practitioners. I think there's still few countries that have curricula on MSPs in universities, and I think we need to improve this. In the 50s, when the concept of land use planning kind of came up, and everywhere in the world, land use planning was being taught in universities. So I think we need to get to the same level for the marine spatial planning. So we need to reinforce that. And of course, I think academia also has a role to advance the concept, kind of conceptually and intellectually, of marine spatial planning. And this is also very, very much essential.
Good, and I'm sure your organization will push this forward. Okay, we're approaching the coffee break. And we will actually, at the next session, talk about cross-border cooperation. So we can have a final comment from the panel, very short, on because two questions on transboundary MSP challenges and cross-border cooperation challenges, just to bridge over from this session to the next session. Heading from here to 2030, focusing on cross-border cooperation, how can your organization contribute? one short comment from each one of you, and then we will wrap up for the coffee break. So, cross-border cooperation, important in working towards 2030, implementing the agenda. How will your organization, perhaps one or two of you want to pick up, want to work with this? Please, Ms. Lee.
I think having global target and common vision has been very instrumental in terms of giving framework for cooperation. So that's where we can see also the useful role of UN and also all these global conventions. But we want to also I want to highlight these regional approaches, because when it comes to the specific issues and context and what are the things to collaborate, I think there are more potential at the regional level. So this linking global processes and also with regional conventions, as Lisa mentioned, and also with there are more than 50 regional fisheries bodies and LME also projects are there. So how to link these global processes so that the regional collaboration can help better national implementation will be the key.
Okay. One more comment? Felix, please.
Maybe just because we're in the ocean governance and MSP session, I'm going to take this further out in the open waters in a way, and get back to the question: what is our vision for 2030? I think one of the aspects we put forward in the ocean governance communication is to work on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And we are engaged in the works towards a convention that would finish there, and I hope that in 2030 it will be there. Another aspect that was mentioned by Charles Ehler in his presentation yesterday was the Arctic. And I think there's nothing for the time being, but with all the melting ice, there'll be a lot in the future. So in 2030, I would like to see a regional fisheries management organization up in the Arctic, and we have started to work already towards that goal. I think that's going to be a big challenge, as is any cross-border aspect.
Thank you. Let's sum up. Thank you for participating, all of you. And this session, we have put the eyes on 2030 and what is being done and what can be done to move ahead and use marine spatial planning, highlight the importance of marine spatial planning in the agenda. And we see many partnerships growing, and I'm sure we will hear more about that during the days to come. Please approach me if you have any questions about the New York conference in June, and I encourage you to follow the preparations. It's not the conference in June that is the most important, but what will follow after and how we work ahead, of course. And now we have a great majority of you that are positive thinking, and you are MSP believers. You think that this will grow quick and fast. So now it's time for the coffee break. We will start at 11 sharp, and we will finish by giving a big applause to the panel. Thank you.